Raison d'être.
Was that English?
Raison d'être.
That was English.
That wasn't English.
Regardless of the type of game design that you do, whether you do video games, tabletop games, board games, card games, this singular French phrase will instantly elevate your game design to the highest levels that you can possibly take it. And it means reason for being, or in other words, the reason that something exists. This is something that you want to be considering at the outset of creating your game in its inception, but then also when it comes to building the systems that are going to be within the game itself, which are, of course, the things that the players are going to be interfacing with when they play your game. So let's get into it. So I'm actually in the process of writing my own systems and getting them together to publish them on DriveThruRPG, and I was just had the Dungeon Dudes playing in the background, and I was watching their video, and they were talking about how they don't necessarily love a lot of the changes that have been made to the cleric class in the 1D&D playtest. And I was already working on this, and I was like, oh my god, like they said they hit something right on the head that I was already thinking about, and so I had to make a video about it. And so I don't want to put any words into their mouth, but the long and short of it was they weren't overall too impressed with the design changes that were made to the cleric class in 1D&D. And I've been watching the Dungeon Dudes for years now, and they're so polite. I think they might be Canadian, and I've come to respect a lot of the viewpoints and the stances that they've taken in the videos over their years. And so for them to come out and say that they don't like something, that means they probably really don't like it. It's probably even bad. And in my experience, bad design comes from this first step being skipped by the game designer. And I have to say that when I look at those documents, I actually feel the same way. And it's because for me, the raison d'être is not clear in these documents. You look at the 1D&D playtest material that they're coming out with, and they're released kind of in a vacuum. There's no context as to what their actual design goals are. Like, what is Wizards of the Coast trying to achieve with these changes? It does leave the players to look at some of these changes and just be kind of baffled. And that is something that you want to stay away from as a game designer, whatever you're designing, because that is an earmark of bad design. Unfortunately, it just is. You want to remove any blockage or any kind of mental barrier that's going to keep the player from interfacing or integrating or interacting fully with your game. I think a lot of times game designers go in and they'll say, well, I want this system to do this. Let's say we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons and you say, I want my combat to be more gritty. And so what you'll do is you'll start homebrewing and tweaking the rules, saying, okay, well, crits are going to do more damage, and this is going to hit harder or whatever. But in that moment, you may be mistaking the desired function of your system for its raison d'être. No, you may say that the function of this system is to make the criticals hit, but that's not the reason that I want this system to exist. Is it the criticals? No, it's probably not that. You think about it a little bit longer and you'll say, oh, the reason that I really want this system to exist is because the combat itself doesn't feel dangerous enough. That is the system's raison d'être. And the fact that the criticals are stronger is just the way that that system works. But it works to the end of making combat feel more deadly. And so what ends up happening is when you stop and you think like, what is the actual reason that I want these systems to be here? What you'll sometimes find is that you have been homebrewing the wrong systems and changing things that don't need to be changed because your raison d'être hasn't been considered. You may be tweaking the critical hits, but that's not what needs to be tweaked in order to actually make the combat at your table with that group feel more dangerous. It might be as simple as reducing the amount of death saves. Like they don't have 3, they have 2 or something like that. And that's an even more simple change that you can make rather than trying to overhaul, build a whole new critical systems with all of this kind of stuff. Maybe your solution is way simpler than that, and you won't necessarily run into the same design problems either when you've considered your raison d'être. Because what's going to end up happening is if you don't have this mapped out and you just start brewing and you don't know where you're going to go, you're going to literally run into problems that you could have seen coming a long time ago. It's basically akin to going to a new place without a map or walking somewhere without looking where you're going. You will literally bump into things, fall into pitfalls, run into holes, come against obstacles that you literally could have seen coming and never would have run into if you had just considered what the reason for the system that you're brewing is. And that comes with every piece of content that you make for your game. If you're homebrewing a brand new spell, what is this raison d'être? Is it to simply look cool? Is it to be really powerful? Is it to provide a functional tool for a certain class to use? You need to consider these things so that you're not just brewing for the sake of brewing, because that is a mistake that I used to run into as a new DM all the time. I used to just brew, and fill up my games and just be drunk on brew. and it would turn my players off. And that happens when you don't have your raison d'etre. And so that brings me to my very next point. Don't make changes, make improvements. When you have your raison d'etre in mind, work toward that goal and work toward only changing the things that are going to achieve that goal and nothing else. Your reason for being, like I said, might be grittier, dirtier, harsher combat. And in that case, you may have multiple systems then, all with different functions, working toward that same raison d'etre. You want minimal impact design so that when you plug your system in, it integrates seamlessly, whether that's a video game, whether that's a board game, tabletop game, whatever. When you're homebrewing, you're building something new, especially when you're slotting something into an already existing game, then you need to be thinking about what exactly are you there to achieve. That's going to make it not only integrate it well, but it's going to give it a real feel of professionalism because it's going to be tight, it's going to be well thought out. And if you're designing from the very beginning, you're designing with this in mind, then it will probably also be very well designed. And Kelly Martin, if you guys are watching this, that's my take on why the things that have been coming out in 1D&D have been kind of middling, because I would have said at first that we didn't know what their raison d'etre was, that they were coming out with this playtest kind of in a vacuum and not really telling us why they were making these changes. But when you look at their recent earnings calls, their investor calls, what Hasbro's doing, and they're talking about how it's, under monetized, and they're going to try to come out with more movies and books and games, and how they're going to be spending less time focusing on the tabletop RPG and its design, which I think was kind of obvious already. I think that their raison d'etre becomes clear.
Hello, I like money.
Yeah, you're right, Kelly. You're right, Martin. These are just changes. And even Bob the World Builder came out with a super interesting video, and even he's super polite. He might be Canadian too. He was talking about how there were one or two things that he really liked, one or two things he really didn't like, but everything else in the document, he said he was neutral about. It was just changes, just blood, just stuff. And that is what you want to avoid, because again, that's a sign of bad game design. When you're looking at the next edition to D&D and you look at why they're changing all these things, their raison d'etre for 1D&D, and I hate to be skeptical about it, but I feel like their reason for making all these changes is just to change the game so that they can have an excuse to come out with a new edition so that they can monetize it as a part of their four-pronged monetization scheme with the game, the books, the movies, and the video game. And that is their real reason. They simply need a different game, a new game, a game that feels different enough from 5th edition that people won't look at it and go, this is literally 5.5. Why did you do this? They're trying to avoid that criticism. So they're just changing things that aren't really going to impact the game too much, but it's going to make it flavored differently enough that they can sell it as a whole new edition so that then they can monetize it with their subscription service through D&D Beyond, which they're planning on. So unfortunately, I feel like we're witnessing the beginning of what has happened to so many beloved IP, whether or not you're talking about Star Wars, you're talking about, oh my gosh, what they did with DC, what they did with Marvel, just the endless content machine that just cranks out a bunch of blah, gray mush so that people can consume it. Unfortunately, I feel like that's basically what the raison d'etre is of Hasbro, who owns Wizards of the Coast right now. And that is why we're seeing some of the lazy design. That's why we're seeing so many of the holes that have been coming out. That's why we're seeing the drop in quality in the modules that Wizards of the Coast have been releasing, because their raison d'etre is not clear, or in this particular case, it doesn't align with the players' interests. They're not worried about making the game more fun for us. They're worried about making it monetizable and easily consumed by the masses. And that's a shame. But you don't have to be like that, and you can be better. So when it comes to your own games and the things that you're creating, consider your raison d'etre. Apply this to every single system before you start writing it, before you put pen to paper. This needs to be going on in your mind. What am I trying to achieve with that? And then when you go to your drawing board and you start writing down your equations and you get to that work, then you too can have a much clearer idea of what to do, what not to do, and you can be clean and you can be precise about it. Unlike Wizards of the Coast. But those are just my personal thoughts. Please take this with you. Raison d'etre. It is not only fun to say, but it is incredibly useful when it comes to game design. If you liked the video, then please do hit the like button. And if you want to hear more, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can also hit the notification bell to see when more videos are going to be coming out. And please check into the Dragonrider campaign, which you get to see me actually DM a game. It's real easy to be a talking head, but it's a lot harder to walk what you talk. So go ahead and check out that video if you want to see me putting into practice what I preach. Make sure to check out the Reddit and also to support the Patreon if you feel so moved. But in the meantime, stay safe, look after each other, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.